All right, the time is 5:07. Our workshop discussion for November 12, 2024 is now in session. First on the agenda is the hearing of residents. Did we have anyone sign up for the workshop discussion? I don't think we did. Okay, so we'll move on. Item number one, a workshop discussion regarding updating the ordinance on blow-up signs and flags for advertising.
Councilwoman Watson, Emily does have a presentation.
Okay, awesome. Then I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Hopefully it'll answer some of your questions, but if you have additional questions, we can fill in. So.
UDC Article 16 definitions, because temporary signs, there's a definition for temporary signs, but then there are a slew of signs that have their own definitions that are also called temporary signs. So a temporary sign out of Article 16 is any sign identified by the UDC which is intended to be displayed for seasonal or brief activities, including but not limited to sales, special promotions, holidays, auctions, and or business grand openings. Then we have wind sign, any display or series of displays, banners, flags, pennants, or other such objects designed and fashioned in such a manner as to move when subjected to wind pressure, and they'll only be permitted as temporary signs. A-frame, a temporary sign constructed in such a manner as to form an A or a tent-like shape, hinged or not hinged at the top, with each angular face held at an appropriate distance. A balloon sign, one or more inflatable devices filled with lighter than air gas, used as a temporary sign for the purpose of directing attention to any location, event, person, product, goods, service, activity, institution, or business. A banner sign, which is a temporary sign constructed of a natural or man-made flexible material, including but not limited to cloth, canvas, vinyl, or fabric. Pennant, which is a long, narrow, usually triangular flag, again, which may be used as a temporary sign to announce grand openings and or special events. And then a bandit sign, which is another form of temporary sign. It's any temporary ground sign announcing a subdivision, new development, or builder, with the note that bandit signs are explicitly prohibited in the UDC. So what do those signs actually look like? Here are some examples of a wind sign, A-frame sign, balloon sign, banner sign, and then that bandit sign at the end. The temporary sign section is in Article 11, Section 2111-17. And we have maximum area and height based on street classifications, which you may not be aware of what those street classifications are. So at the bottom, you'll see examples of limited access, that's IH-35 and I-10. And then unlimited access, think your FM roads, so 7842, 3009, and Schertz Parkway as well. So depending on the street classification determines if you can have a larger, in both area and height, temporary sign. So areas with limited access, so again that's 35 and 10, you can have a 32 square foot per face sign or 10% of the building facade, whichever is less, and that sign has a maximum height of 6 feet. If you're on one of your FM roadways or Schertz Parkway, you have a maximum area of 24 square feet or 7% of the building facade and a max height of 4 feet. And then all other streets, so think everything else, Elbel, Borgfeld, Main Street, all of those, 16 square feet or 5% of the building facade, whichever is less, and a max height of 3 feet. So some additional requirements from 2111-17, minimum setback. So all temporary signs have to be at least 15 feet from any property line, not just your front property line, but your side property lines as well. And then there's time limitations. So a temporary freestanding sign shall be permitted for a maximum of 180 days per calendar year. No additional temporary sign permit shall be issued for the same property or business for a period of 14 days after the expiration of the previous permit. There shall be no limit to the number of temporary sign permits that may be issued for a particular property, and the cumulative total number of days for which all temporary sign permits issued for a property or business shall not exceed 180 calendar days. And then there's a limitation that no more than 2 types of temporary signs shall be permitted per business or tenant at any given time. So we pulled some data on sign permit issuance and then also sign violations. So the number of temporary sign permits issued in 2023 was 9. In 2024 was 6. So in comparison between temporary signs and then your traditional wall signs, monument signs, in 2023 there were 73 sign permits issued. In 2024 there were 82. So you can see a very small number of temporary sign permits are actually applied for. In relation to the sign violations, so this is information collected from our code enforcement or neighborhood services team. So the number of sign violations entered in 2024 to date, well, I would say till last week. There's probably been more since last week. There was 1,242, and then number of sign violations closed, 1,238, and then just kind of for a scale, between September 1st and October 31st, there were 394 sign violations. So that's signs that didn't obtain a permit, bandit signs. When you think bandit signs, say you're driving down 1518 on the weekend and you see the metal H-frames with the kind of the core plastic, those are bandit signs. So we did some research on both our target cities and neighboring city research, and I just picked some of them here. So New Braunfels, you can see bandit signs. Bandit signs are banned and are listed under prohibited signs. They're actually considered trash as soon as they're posted in the right-of-way. However, signs exempt from regulations or permits, so it's different than City of Schertz standards. Inflatable signs and tethered balloons are exempt from regulations or permitting, so you can have inflatable signs in New Braunfels. And then there's some information on A-frames as well. They can also be erected without a sign permit, provided that they meet those requirements. In Selma, banners, pennants, twirling signs, sandwich, A-frames, balloons, or other gas-filled objects, all of those are considered prohibited signs, along with any kind of inflatable display. Those are also strictly prohibited. In Georgetown, portable signs, inflatable signs, flashing, fluttering, swinging, rotating, billboard signs, all of those are prohibited. Bandit signs are also prohibited in Georgetown as well. Now you can get a banner or a flag depending on the material and the size with the approval of a temporary permit in Georgetown. In Universal City, it's a little different. Exempt from permitting is any temporary sign as defined and regulated in the chapter other than cloth banner signs not exceeding 32 square feet. So they do have, they have a little more flexibility in terms of what signs they allow in Universal City. In Frisco, banner signs are allowed as a temporary sign, but they're only allowed for a period of 14 days. Inflatable device signs, again, they're a temporary sign. It does require a permit. And then prohibited signs, your feather flags, moving signs, bandit signs. In McKinney, temporary banners are allowed with a permit. A-frames are only allowed temporarily for businesses, specifically within their town center. And then temporary signs include banners, posters, pennants, again, 30-day period, and a permit's required. In McKinney, the inflatable signs, portable and or display signs are prohibited, and then wind-driven signs are also prohibited. So some potential concerns with non-permitted temporary sign. So say we got rid of permitting, what could be potential concerns? Site distance, so right now we require that any temporary sign has to be a minimum of 15 feet back. That's to allow for that site visibility. The UDC explicitly prohibits signs that obstruct vision of that site triangle, again for the safety aspect of it. Potential to hit underground utilities or being too close to overhead utilities. So we did reach out to GVC and CPS. GVC does not allow permanent signs in their easements. They indicated that they would prefer to not have temporary signs within their easements as well, but their easement language doesn't grant them the ability to outright prohibit a non-permanent structure. CPS Energy will not permit temporary or permanent structures to be placed in a manner that will obstruct CPS Energy access for maintenance or repair of any CPS Energy facility. So we'd have to be concerned with that as well if there is a CPS utility line. And then aesthetics. What is the desired look for Schertz? Everyone's been through that city where you're driving down the roadway and see bandit and temporary and flag signs, you know, kind of littered up and down the roadways. So some examples, I'll show the next two slides, and I'll kind of flip back and forth. All of these pictures were taken on a roadway in San Antonio within 1 mile of each other. So we drove 1 mile and took pictures of all the temporary signs that we saw. So you'll see, you know, you got your inflatable wiggly arm guys, lots of flags. And this is just one slide of that. There's the next slide. So this is an example of if we had no temporary sign regulations, we could theoretically look like this and have 1 mile of roadway that has, you know, an unlimited number of temporary signs on it. So benefits if we changed the temporary sign regulations, depending on if and how the regulations are modified, it could be easier for businesses to have temporary signs or to have more temporary signs advertising their business. And then again, depending on if or how the regulations are modified, it could free staff up to focus on other things. Bandit signs and non-permitted temporary signs take up a significant amount of time for enforcement, including monthly sign runs, where a neighborhood services staff member spends several hours on a Saturday once a month removing bandit signage in the right-of-way. We could make UDC amendments for temporary signage. Changes to height limitations, we could allow taller signage. We could change the location setback limitations. We could change the area. We could allow larger, not just taller, but larger temporary signs. We could change the restriction on the number of signs, how many types of signs, the maximum time allowed for temporary signs. So what that could look like if we didn't want to change specific sections or requirements, UDC section 2111.5 is our exempted signs section, which outlines the types of signs that are exempt from permitting and regulations. That includes political signs, utility signs, official flags. We could, if we wanted to, list out the temporary signs, whether that's wind signs, A-frames, balloon signs, bandit signs, that would be or could be exempt from permitting and regulations altogether.
All right, thank you, Ms. Delgado. Wow. Ms. Watson, this was requested by you, so I'll let you be the first to have any questions.
Interested in maybe prolonging the temporary for maybe a 30-day period, if that's possible, something to look at. Because I think you listed it as 14 days.
So that's if your permit expires,
Oh, okay.
then you can't have another permit for another 14 days. But a temporary sign can be allowed for a maximum of 180
I see.
days
Okay.
per calendar year.
Okay.
Councilman,
I'll get back to
you
you.
finished? All right. Councilmember Davis?
Can you go back to the one where it talks about the different zones?
The difference.
It's like one of the early slides. Yeah, this one here. Maximum height based on street classification. So with limited access, and you're saying areas with limited access, such as 35 and 10, the maximum height is 6 feet. If it's unlimited access, Schertz Parkway through Double Line, it's 4 feet. All other streets, 3 feet. To me, this seems kind of a disconnect, because if you go back up, I mean, I'm okay with doing the permits, and I certainly don't want to rescind a sign ordinance, because, you know, 99.9% of your workload is all bandit signs. I have a house for sale. I buy used junk cars, all that kind of good stuff. And they put them right on the in the easement or on the right of way, or they put them right on a utility pole. Got all that. But if you've got a business that's got an A-frame sign, or if you go back to the different types of temporary signs, like the wind sign or the balloon sign, I mean, 99.9% of our businesses can't use a wind sign or a balloon sign if the height limit is like 3 feet.
So I will say, when I was doing the research, the smallest balloon sign that I could find is 6 feet. If you were
I mean,
to
yeah,
try
they're
to purchase,
typically
yeah.
larger. And again, I certainly won't want to see one right in the right of way where it can blow over into the street and cause a problem with vehicle operation. But if it's back on their property and we have an ordinance that says you got to get a permit and it's only good for so many days, and then you've got to get a new permit, you can only have a max of 2 types of temporary signs, a wind sign and a balloon sign. That sort of prevents somebody from putting up, 37 wind signs across the front of their business, which I spent a lot of time down on the southwest side of San Antonio, so I do see the properties that have 3 dozen wind signs across the front of their property, and it's not very appealing to me. But if we're allowing someone to have 1 or 2 wind signs, or a wind sign and a balloon sign or something like that, I'm okay with it. I just kind of think that we're sort of limiting them by saying if you're on not a main arterial, you can only do a 3-foot sign. We've got a lot of other areas that we're trying to do. I mean, we're going to redevelop Main Street, and we're going to encourage business development down there. And if somebody's investing money in Main Street and flipping a property and opening up a business, to me it seems ridiculous to turn around and say, well, by the way, don't advertise it now. I mean, just don't put up a sign, because we don't want people to know that you're now open for business. So, I mean, to me, the height restriction with regards to some of our locations, I think, is out of sync with reality nowadays. Could we make an argument that maybe 2 temporary signs per property is the max? I guess I could make an argument that it depends on the property. If it's a single property on Main Street, then maybe 1 or 2 signs should be the max. But if somebody's opening up a business like a car lot, and it's, a couple thousand square feet, having 3 or 4 temporary signs versus only 2, I don't think would be, the end of the world. And particularly if we're going to turn around and say there's a time limit on it, you have to get a permit. It has to be these kind of signs, and here are the rules. So I think there is some wiggle room that we could probably tweak this a little bit with regards to either specifically the height and locations, and then potentially the number of signs per property, maybe based on the size of the property.
Do you have a recommendation, Councilmember Davis, for what you would like to see possibly? Do you have a recommendation on what it should be changed, or some direction for staff?
Based on how we define, I mean, we have perfect definitions on everything. So I can't imagine anybody wouldn't be able to understand the difference between an A-frame sign or a blow-up sign or a wind sign. We've got it all mapped out. That's fine. I just kind of think that if you say it's here are the signs we allow with a permit on a temporary basis for a specified period of time, well, we turn around and say 3 feet on all other streets, that sort of basically takes 3/4 of our temporary signs and say you can't use them. So I would recommend that we reassess the height limits. And then the only other concern I have is we say there's no more than 2 signs per location. Again, I'm okay with that, but I would think that there might be an opportunity to maybe tweak that based on the size of the property. Like I said, a single small lot business, really doesn't have the sign to put up 3 or 4 or 5 signs in most cases, but there are others that might have that. And if they're opening up a new business, if it's a new business on a large lot, are they really getting the word out with 1 flag banner on their lot versus having maybe 3 or 4? I don't know. So I would be open to that.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I was going to tag along on the same thread there. When I say a side street, a residential street, you say 3 feet and 16 square feet. 16 square feet is a 4x4, so it's a foot too tall to begin with. I realize that we're probably talking about open house, estate sales, things along that line, garage sale signs, as temporary things. And I'm good with that. But I also agree if it's a business and it's an opening, it needs to have some more recognition, and it needs to be a viable size. And Main Street being one of those all other streets, it needs to have a little bit more visibility, a little bit more. The time, 180 days, don't have a problem with that. That's more, in my thinking, that's more than enough. If you can't get the word out in 180 days that you're open for business, there's something wrong. But you know, if there's a special or something like that that you have going on, you apply for a temporary sign for a couple of weeks and, you know, you go on through that. But the size should be more geared towards whether it's a business, it's a grand opening, or if it's just a garage sale type of thing. I don't want to stop garage sales. I don't want to stop open house signs. I think they're essential for those events and small business events. But again, you know, 3 feet and 16 square feet, that's kind of contradictory in its own right. So just take a look at some of these dimensions so that it makes a little bit more sense. You know, if that 16 square foot is a quote unquote building sign, that's another story. But if it's just a temporary H-frame coroplast type of sign, you know, I can see a 4x4 sign out there for certain events. You know, and that again, that's 4 feet, not 3 feet. So, just taking a look at the common sense aspect to it. But yeah, definitely businesses need to have a little bit more opportunity to be visible.
Ms. Delgado, just for information for our viewers, what is the fee for a permit?
For a sign permit, for a temporary sign permit? Lisa's going to look it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Council, any other comments, questions?
I realize that there's been a lot of comment from the public on some things here recently, and I thank the staff for, in a timely manner, taking a look at this and coming up with some ideas. So thanks for going out of your way and doing that. And I realize there's a couple of very vocal small businesses out there, and that's fine. You know, as long as it's being done fairly across the board.
Just to be clear, real quick, just to be clear from what I'm hearing from council in terms of direction is to evaluate the height for all other streets and the number of signs for a business. So would it be acceptable to raise it to 4 feet for the areas with unlimited access and to limit it to 2? And that would be the UDC amendment that we would propose? That seem reasonable?
Yeah,
Just looking
for
direction
those,
for
yeah.
staff.
And again, from the business aspect, like I say, I can see a 4x4 sign out being a reasonable sign to get information on and get attention. But I can also see that used along with a couple of wind banners, you know. And if they want a balloon sign at their front door, you know, as long as it's not on the street, you know, I don't know if that should be a problem.
Yeah, so if that's a general feeling, I think what staff would say, right, because what we don't want to do are create different standards for the tube guy, right? It can be up to 12 feet, but then I got a business owner going, how come he can have a tube guy up to 12 feet, but my sign's limited to 4 feet, right? That's a little bit of the dilemma that we run into as we start getting so nuanced, and then now I got somebody else complaining going, hey, how come I can't have a sign 5 feet tall, right? The other is if you want the dimensions to match, right? So you're right, maximum square foot is 16 square feet. You're capped at 3 feet. You can do a longer sign, just not as tall. But if you want the dimensions to match, then we need to have all that sort of in sync. So the question I would start with is, I think most of the flags we see that you can find are 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the minimum, right? So if you're going to do this, just go up to 6 feet tall and do it across the board on all the different streets. So your max height is 6 feet. It's not just for the flags, it's for any temp sign, right? So then we don't have some guy complaining, I put a regular sign up, but it has to be shorter than his feather flag, right? So I think what staff would say is 6 feet tall, if you want the math to match, right? Make them 36 square feet per. The problem with that is you still can't do the tube guy, right? Because the tube guy is bigger than 6 feet. So right? You got that, you got the inflatable gorilla. That's really the question I think we're looking for from council is, do you want to allow the tube guy, which point, those are what, 12 feet tall? So then just go up to 12 feet on the temp signs, right? And run that across the board for everybody. I think would be what I would say. Because otherwise what you're going to have people calling you next going, this doesn't make sense to me. You can have a 12-foot tube guy, but I'm capped at 6 feet. What gives?
Councilmember Davis?
Yeah, I personally don't have a problem with the tube guy. Maybe that's one of the ones because of its height that there's a different permitting standard where that's not allowable for 180 days. It's one thing, to me, it's one thing if you're opening up a new business and you're trying to put the flags, banners out there or the tube guy to draw attention and visibility to your location. Does it need to be there for 6 months? I would probably argue no. If you haven't gotten people to find your place in 6 months, you're probably got other issues that you have to worry about. But maybe that's a way to go, saying for a temporary sign of a certain dimension, it's up to 180 days for a temporary sign that is larger, such as the tube guy or the flag banners. I'm okay with that as well. If you want to have the wind-operated flag banners or the tube guy, that's a permit that allows it for 30 days, 15 days. I don't care. I just don't think that I don't think it would be a problem if we allowed them. It would be a problem if we allowed them as just that's a part of your normal business and they're out there every day and they're getting ripped and torn and faded and then it starts looking crazy. But if somebody wants to put one up for a period, like I said, grand opening or something like that, I think that could be an option.
So what we could do is we could go general temp signs with 180 day. Those are 6 by 6, 36 square feet, right? So we've increased substantially the size of those signs. But then you're allowed an unlimited height, size, or number of new business, we'll call it, signs that are issued for up to 30 days max within 90 days of the CO being granted for the business.
Yeah.
And that way you can put a bunch of them out for 30 days, as many as you want, and go something like that. So we've increased the amount of temporary signage we have in general. The question I guess I'd have is, do you want to do the 6, if we do the 6 by 6, then to me, I don't care if it's a standard sign or if it's a flag sign. If you meet the 6 by 6, you can do the feather flags and, kind of thing. I don't know that we're going to get in the business of when they start looking ratty or faded or whatever, the business owner can handle that. But that would allow the feather flags all the time for 180 days, up to 2. But then this new opening allows an unlimited amount of signage, unlimited size, unlimited height for businesses going in. And we give them, 30 days was suggested, and you've got that. You just got to apply for that within 90 days of a CO. Something like that. Now, the other question is we tend to get this stuff pushed up into the right-of-way. And so that becomes one of the issues on the lacking the height is what do we do on the overhead easements, right? So CPS is still saying, I don't want anything there. And so how do y'all want to do that?
The way I look at that is if it's a 6, 8, 10, 12-foot balloon guy, they don't need to be up that far. They can be in their parking lot. And it's still going to be quite visible from the street.
So meet the setback and out of the easement
Yeah.
on anything
I
that
don't have a
exceeds
problem with
the
that
6
at all.
by 6?
Yeah.
Yep.
If you got to put your flag stick in the dirt at the edge, that's one thing. But they don't need to be bringing them up to the
Yeah,
sidewalk.
all of that sort of perfectly fine. So again, what we'll do is the change on permanent temporary sign is everybody is 6 by 6, 36 square feet. So the math matches. You can have those 180 days, up to 2 at a time. And then we'll have the new opening, unlimited amount of signage during that 30-day window, unlimited height. And then we're generally taking away the prohibition on wind-driven signs. So we'll start seeing more feather flags even as our normal temp, because those will go up to 6 feet. So that's the implication of it. Is that what you want to do? That's permanent. That's 180. Yeah. Right, so if we go up to, because you're right, the problem on the feather flags is they make them 6 feet generally, right? And so when we increase the normal height to 6 feet, every business is easy to go out and buy 2 feather flags, plant them in the ground in front, and they can have those up to 180 days. And so we take away the prohibition on the wind-driven or the distraction, which is sort of what keeps that from being a problem.
Hey, I think we got direction.
Okay, we'll run that to P&Z
All
then.
right, thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next workshop discussion regarding pedestrian right-of-way at the crosswalks. Chief?
Good evening, Mayor, Councils, Mr. Williams. This evening, we'll be talking about pedestrian right-of-way at crosswalk. Try to see if I can give some clarity on this. While it is a common assumption that pedestrians always have the right-of-way, Texas traffic laws have some nuance to this rule, and in Texas, pedestrians do have the right-of-way when they are in marked crosswalks, unmarked crosswalks at intersections, and when they are following pedestrian control signals. And there's one other exception. However, outside these scenarios, pedestrians must yield the right-of-way to vehicles on the road. It's crucial for both drivers and pedestrians to be aware of the rules of the road regarding pedestrians in Texas to ensure safety and avoid accidents. So first slide here is pedestrian right-of-way. If at a controlled signal, what we're talking about here is a crosswalk that has the wait, cross, don't cross, those, or if there's controlled there, a pedestrian must follow those signals just as if they were a motor vehicle, so they follow the green or the red. Now, once they're in that intersection or that crosswalk, and as long as they entered it on a cross and it changes, they still have the right of way and can clear the crosswalk as soon as possible, is what this section of the law is. Pedestrian right-of-way at crosswalks, again, a pedestrian has a right-of-way at a crosswalk when it has a signal if they have the cross, and then if there's no control signal in place in operation, the pedestrian is on the half. The key I want to part on this is the pedestrian is on the half of the roadway in which the vehicle is traveling or is approaching so closely from the opposite half of the roadway to be in danger. So what we're trying to tell you here is if I'm traveling, say on the northbound side and our pedestrians on the east side, even if the pedestrian steps in a roadway and the vehicle didn't have a chance to stop safely, the pedestrian still needs to yield right away. But once the pedestrian's in the crosswalk and the motorist can stop, they need to yield right away to them. If they're entering on the opposite side, the motorist can still go through, but once they're actually into the crosswalk, they need to yield the right away. So it can be on the opposite side there. And again, B is notwithstanding subsection A is above there. A pedestrian may not suddenly leave the curb or other place of safety and proceed into a crosswalk in the path of a vehicle so close that it's impossible for the vehicle operator to stop and yield. Crosswalk definition, and so many times we have this question, and see if I can hopefully make this crystal clear to y'all. There's two types of crosswalks. Those that are marked, and then those that are natural boundaries. I've added some pictures in here to hope I can clarify that to you. So if you have a crosswalk that's marked, it can be lines that are solid, it can be bars that go across, or you have natural crosswalks, where if it's in an intersection that has sidewalks, and it's an imaginary line following those sidewalks across, so within that is also a crosswalk. Then you can also cross the street at a 90-degree angle when there's not an intersection. So that would be like at a residential area, you want to go visit your neighbor. At all times when you're crossing the roadway in those circumstances at a 90-degree straight across to your neighbor, the vehicle has the right of way at all times. Crossing at a point other than a crosswalk, Again, this is where, at a bridge, what we're talking about, that gives you that right of way. What we're also talking about is crossing diagonally in some cities and some municipalities, counties allow people to cross diagonally in an intersection, but it is against the law unless you actually have an ordinance and it's written and it's clearly marked in that intersection to cross diagonally. Who controls a crosswalk or the traffic under the Texas Transportation Code? There's 2 people as a rule, 3 people, but in our city, it's usually going to be 2. It's going to be a police officer or a crossing guard, and the crossing guard has stipulations in there where if they're performing their duties as a crossing guard, or you can have a flagger who is directing traffic at a construction area or where they're doing a work zone. Those are the people that can control it. So a private citizen, so like on a Sunday at church, somebody wants to step in a roadway, even though they put a vest on, they have no authority to direct traffic. So this first intersection I have as a slide, this is an intersection with only 3 crosswalks with a pedestrian control signal present. And if a lot of our intersections, they usually only have crosswalks on 3 of the intersections, not necessarily all 4 unless it's a major intersection. So this is Savannah and Schertz Parkway. You have the crosswalks on the east and west on the south side of the street, and there are also pedestrian control signals. So in this example here, the only time that you can cross those crosswalks and still have the right-of-way legally without jaywalking is when you have the walk and to proceed. Otherwise, you're in violation of the law. The next one is going to be an intersection with 4 crosswalks with pedestrian control signal present and safety islands. And this would be El Bell and 3009. So this is where all the construction is going on right now. They just finished it. And the red triangle is what we would call a safety island. So there is actually a crosswalk that will be painted between the safety island and the curb. That's not controlled by the signals, pedestrian signals. So you follow the rules of the roadway for there to get to the safety island. Once you're on the safety island, you need to follow the walk and don't walk signals to get across the crosswalk. And in this example here, you have a crosswalk on all 4 corners of this intersection. This is a crosswalk with the connections of the lateral lines and the sidewalk with curbs. This is Winburn and Lindbergh. So on the east side or the west side of this intersection, you can see there's a sidewalk on the west side of the intersection. So you take the lateral lines of the sidewalk as an imaginary line. That's what I'm trying to depict here with the blue lines. That would be an imaginary line. That is your crosswalk. And then once you enter into the crosswalk, you have the right-of-way in this intersection. So further comments I'd like to do before we get to the questions and comments again are, again, for some of the things for pedestrian safety tips is if you were driving a vehicle, you need to be defensive. Even though you can be right, you can be dead right. You know, before you cross the street, you should be looking for eye contact to make sure that person, the operator, sees you. And if they don't, you can call in a complaint. So always use the sidewalks if there's no sidewalks. And in fact, the law states that we ask pedestrians to walk on the opposite side of the roadway and they walk toward traffic so that you can see that. Again, always use crosswalks. And again, as I spoke earlier, it's almost like driving. Look left, look right, look left again before you cross. Pedestrian safety is a shared responsibility, not only between the motorist, but also with the pedestrian. It's a shared responsibility. So in 2021, the state of Texas passed the Lisa Torrey Smith Act. It was a young mother who was killed in Missouri City crossing a crosswalk at that time. There was no law about hitting somebody that was in the crosswalk. So this is where the crosswalk laws were changed, where it talked about once you're in the crosswalk, as long as you didn't do it under the circumstances I mentioned earlier where the vehicle could safely stop. They enhanced it and made it a criminal act based off of the level of injury. So you can go anywhere from a misdemeanor to a felony if you hit somebody in the crosswalk and you cause severe injury or death.
Chief, I'm going to have to stop you here. We have a hard break. Thank you for the information. If council has any questions, please contact the chief. I think for clarity, the main thing we have to alert our citizens is that once they enter the crosswalk, they still have to be careful when they enter the crosswalk. but once they're in the crosswalk, they do have the right-of-way, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what you're saying?
It depends on, so if it's an open crosswalk, and if you enter on the same side as the car is there, the answer is yes, as long as they're from a safe distance. And the other side, the mere fact you just step in, if the car, he still has a longer distance to pass, and that's in the law.
Okay, all right. All right, with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, Chief.